All right, we're gonna go ahead and call the police and fire committee meeting to order. I'm gonna say welcome to Joe Lewis. You're a member of this committee, so, we'll be discussing some interesting things, I think, today. Judge, you called this, and I know that you've talked to them about the ARP money. So I'm gonna ask you to give us some information.
This is another, issue that does fall under the ARP money, which has, I think, caused us to, see the importance of starting another committee off of it rather than leaving it in the judge's office. And so, this is about the procurement of 2 ambulances to enhance our response time in Mississippi counties to 911 calls. I've spoken with Jennifer Reveal several times and met with her 3 times here lately over this. We're trying to move forward on it. I know Justice McCullum has, Justice McCullum has had some anxiety, I guess, over our moving on our speed over getting the ambulances. And Wilson has accommodated us, been very generous about that. I've also spoken with Ms. Holloman about the details of getting those ambulances. The price, by the way, we did get a price for 2 fully outfitted ambulances. The price there is $445,574. Total. They're separately. They're $222,787. Now, keep in mind those are 2021 Chevrolet ambulances with striker stretcher and mount, a Zoll cardiac monitor and ventilator. We do have ventilators that we've already purchased through the state purchasing. That's in my office right now. They're waiting this. Hopefully we'll get through this fairly soon, but it doesn't really look like it. There's a number of issues. And Ms. Holloman had sent me a copy of 2 CFR 200 subsection C, and more importantly, paragraphs 200.313, 200.318, 200.319, and 320. So you get into a lot of specifics about how this can be accomplished if you're going to use this money. The next issue at hand is how we allow Pafford or ambulance service to use these. What sort of a contract would we use? Would we use a $1 a year lease, or would we use a memorandum agreement? Which is going to be not only the correct and accepted method of conveying this capital improvement over to a private entity, but also, well, and just in contracts in general. So that's why I thought it would be a good thing to move this out of this committee back into the new committee that would do the ARP money, and would investigate some of these potential problems at hand and keep us from making a mistake and not getting all the I's dotted and T's crossed. The other thing was the proposed lease that we already have in place. Justice Ash, I know that you've got some concerns over the legality of it.
Well, when we started talking about buying 2 ambulances, my concern quickly became, number one, I understood that under the ARP money, we could not lease these back to Pafford. And obviously, if we give them to them, then we have went into business with Pafford. And I asked Jake to do the research on it, because I'm not an attorney. I'm just about to be dangerous. I'm going to let Jake speak to the legalities of our contract period, because in reading it, I had some questions about it, and he's answered them. So, Jake, could you give us the information on that?
Yeah, I'll keep it really short. Basically, the agreement that was entered into in 2015 by Judge Carney, that's a federal antitrust violation. you can't have an exclusive agreement for all ambulance services, and Arkansas is pretty clear about that. We have AG memos dating back to the 80s about this specific issue. It can be for emergency services only, but not all ambulance services. And that's what our contract specifically gives Pafford. All 24-hour service for all ambulances, emergency or not. So whether it's somebody who's been shot and needs an emergency transport, or it's somebody who's transport from a nursing home to a south. That's the issue with that. So that makes it what's called the void after the show, which means it was never valid from the beginning. So I think it needs to be renegotiated.
And what I'm taking away from that is the key issue. We can designate an emergency service. That's from original point to the hospital.
Correct.
If the hospital is not capable of handling that situation, if they need cardiac surgery, which we do not have here, it's still an emergency transfer, but that doesn't necessarily mean Pafford gets that transfer.
No, they don't get anything by exclusivity. It would just be a matter of, in terms, if you're in an emergency situation, I would imagine it's the one with least resistance.
Whoever's available. So, and the problem that we've had in the past, and I know this firsthand because when I had COVID and had to be transported, they told me the only ambulance that could transport me up Mississippi County to Pafford, which they had other ambulance services that could come in, but they would not because they said Pafford had an exclusive contract and would sue them. So we need to get that part straight, that they are from point of injury or point of emergency to the hospital. And then after that, it becomes whatever ambulance service is available, whatever ambulance service the family wants to use, so on and so forth.
They told the nursing home those shows, what they call a different service transfer, to a different facility, that after said they would sue if they came to it. So private entity has no choice according to them. So if they would come to my house, get me or my wife, would I not have the right to know who transports me? It's our contract. You're talking to a guy that's great issues with Pafford now.
In an emergency situation, the county has designated them as our emergency transport.
But that's no good anymore, is it?
Well, basically, I think this voids it because we gave it exclusive.
I would imagine it would be, so in getting contracts with this, it would be severable, I would imagine. So I would think it would just have to be re-ratified for the correct terms, since we're not bringing any antitrust litigation for it. That's a whole separate can of worms to open up. But for the county's benefit, I think it's just leverage to renegotiate the deal with Pafford.
Is there a severability clause in there that states that if any of these determined to be not legal, that the rest of the legal parts are still in place, or whatever that normal paragraph is? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
No severability clause.
So that would make the entire thing over. I just don't know.
Now, let's say Dr. Cohen decides that he has a family member and it's not an emergency transfer, they need to be taken to St. Bernard's. Then you have the right to call anyone you so desire, and you get to pick them. And I'm going to use, I know what you're looking at, because my wife looks at the same thing. She can't recommend the DME company because that is your choice on who you buy a walker, a wheelchair, a bedside commode. Same thing with an ambulance. You can't recommend an ambulance service. If you want to call Emerson, our patient transfer service, that's your choice. In an emergency, like when we have a wreck on the interstate, we designated Pafford to be the responding unit. That's all we can do, as I understand it, under this antitrust.
But all that needs to be renegotiated too now, and even the emergency.
We're gonna have to redo the contract completely, and that'll be up to the judge.
Well, and this is the way I think, because keep in mind, we've got two issues here. We've got the additional ambulances, which is gonna fall under this new committee. And then you have the existing contract which I think should stay within this committee. And then work through our county attorney and make sure that we're complying with the federal and state law. No, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Cullen.
Well, I'll bring up the personal issue. I have a problem, I don't mind expressing the problem that I have with the professionalism with which Pafford works. Give you a specific example. Had a patient having what appeared to be an acute stroke. Place for that patient to go, I agree, is a stroke center in Memphis. But in the world today, insurance companies direct everything. They're out of network. I call Pafford. They come and I say, have an accepting doctor in Jonesboro. Patient goes outside, I've known her for daughter's with her, and the Pafford paramedic said, we don't care what Dr. Scully says, we want you to the airport out here, we're gonna fly that patient to the stroke center. I've been 20 years younger, I slapped him halfway across the parking lot. Because I'm trying to protect my patient, health-wise, and financially too. I owe them that. And Pafford just ignored her, so I got on the phone telling them don't come back. I have to put them back in my pickup truck, take them where they need to go off. I do not want them back on my property because of their attitude, their unprofessional activity. And I'll go on away from that about speed, which they respond south of Osceola. It right now is in a situation, and nobody from the city limits of Osceola South is satisfied with any service. 45 minutes to get to my house. Pick up the guy rolled to do 45 minutes. His sister came from Dell, Arkansas, and moved back there. They had an ambulance at the office when we called. Put a shift change down.
Well,
I'm not used to medicine being convenient.
I'm gonna defer to you on transferring that to the other committee. I'm just gonna state my opinion. And what's this? I don't know if this will come up for a vote in this committee or not, but my thoughts are, my question is, why are we buying the ambulance? Pafford wants to continue to provide our emergency service. They should buy the ambulance and they should place it in Wilson. If they don't wish to, then we should, just like we did with the rest of the lake, Emerson ambulance service responds over there. They have a base in Manila, I believe it is. We should look to see if somewhere else wants to respond in the Wilson area. I don't feel it is incumbent upon us to buy an ambulance for them to make a profit.
I agree from the standpoint that, and I don't know, I haven't talked to this fellow in 90 days, and I tried to call him all together to the meeting. We have someone interested in putting an ambulance in Osceola, ambulance in Wilson, and at least 2 in Osceola, but they don't want to go north of Lake Shore, the same reason Emerson's there. They don't want to butt heads and that stretches from 2 things from one another. That's nobody picking on the city of Lyle or the Chickasaw district at all. It's just the proximity of the people that have to work for them and the equipment they have is better for, I mean, if you come to Osceola, Arkansas, you don't know what the most drive is, you don't think you're driving. That's a main residential street in the city, and when you can't find it, somebody's got a problem. I got a problem.
We have an issue with dispatch because their dispatch isn't even located. They have no idea where our streets are.
I asked them to come to my office. They need the address. What suite? I said, no suite. just call Rochelle and tell them where to come, and I'll answer all these foolish questions you got to put in the computer while they're on their way. Well, we can't do that. Well, I'm old fart, my temper's short. I didn't talk ugly, but because I didn't want to. I said, I don't need you. By the time I give you all that, the person I've got you in trouble. We have to load them in a family car and take them to Brentford and keep them alive till y'all can figure out if you're gonna come. So I have a personal deal with them, and I'm like Rick, we'll decide what's best to do, you all decide what's best to do, and you see what I feel. But I'll go along with what Quorum Court wants to do.
Those two, I mean, if we're gonna, I think it's kind of a tabled issue, the new ambulances, if we're looking at redoing the entire contract right now anyway. That might be a negotiating factor, you know, or not even necessary at all, because if we contract with another company, they may not need the additional ambulances, like, they may have to clean.
I think we need to decide what we're gonna do, I think you're right.
And then, I mean, and bring it back, it might come back up, but.
Well, the judge has tried to make Pafford do right. I was in the meeting, and you tried to make it do right, and your suggestion was ambulance. And immediately when he offered the ambulance, they didn't know we were gonna pay the salaries too. You know, that one good. I'm sorry, again, my bad attitude, my fault.
Well, I heard your frustrations Tuesday night, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to be there, but, so given the issues at hand, how do you suggest that we move forward with it?
Well, I think we need to do, if they're still interested, I have to call back and see to it, because there's so much time. If somebody's willing to come to us and bring their own ambulances.
Did you say 3 ambulances?
3, to an Osceola, one and Wilson. If they're willing to come to us, pay their own personnel, if they're not in the middle of litigation with Pafford, he says, I don't have pocketbook to do that. Then if we get them to do that like Emerson did at Manila, what do we have to lose?
Well, when they say not coming north, that's just pickups. Will they bring those people to the hospital or to the OCL facility? Is that the facility that they would take it
What
to?
they prefer not to do is have an emergency response north there, because it stretches their equipment.
If
Right, but I mean,
had
they
an
wouldn't bring,
accident.
right, but I mean, they wouldn't bring them, like, pick up and then bring them to the Blythe
Oh, they
Hospital?
would, sure, they do that.
Okay, I mean, so I'm saying they're okay with coming to the hospital north of the county, but not going, okay.
They just don't want to
I
do
think-
it. And here's what we're into in the county. You get an emergency situation, I don't think anybody would turn you down, but what we talked about in Pafford, if we put that in Wilson, it's an emergency ambulance, it can come to Osceola, Luxor, Burdett, if you have a catastrophe. But we wouldn't do routine transfer. I think we're talking about the same thing.
Jeff, the 2 ambulances that you were talking about with the ARP money, where were they gonna be housed?
One in Wilson and one in Blythe.
One in Blythe? Oh, yes, why put one in Blythe?
Why, I didn't.
That was Pafford's request.
I'm sorry, I mean, do they not provide the ambulances?
So why are you gonna do
I mean, I understand the Wilson, I mean, I get that, I'm sorry, it took me by surprise. I understand the Wilson if maybe they, you know, trying to solve a problem, but I really don't understand Blytheville. I mean, that's the biggest city in Mississippi County, why wouldn't they have enough ambulances in Blytheville?
Well, I'm with you from the standpoint that she said to the judge and I, that's not financially feasible to go to South Mississippi County. And of course, that steps on my toes, because there's a lot of things I do with my financial feasible. My children out there without food and water and lights are still on, so when it comes to people, you just do the right thing. And that's essentially what we're talking about with ambulance at Wilson. We made no man's land on Wilson side with their response time.
If Pafford's wanting another ambulance in Blytheville, wouldn't that necessarily mean Blytheville's being underserved, even though they put all their resources there, that they can technically get more fees at a faster rate? So why not renegotiate just to do it exclusively in Blytheville?
I didn't hear all that, I'm sorry.
Oh, if they're wanting another ambulance in Blytheville, wouldn't that mean that they're wanting more resources in Blytheville because they can get more fees at a faster rate?
I would say that's true. I don't know what the response time like in Blytheville, but in today's world with COVID especially, we run out of hospital beds. So it doesn't make any difference whether you got one or not, you got to go someplace else. Hey, for instance, had a patient that comes to see me from West Memphis. went to the Baptist Emergency Room in West Memphis. There were no COVID intensive care beds in Memphis, Tennessee, or Jonesboro, Arkansas. They transported her to Louisville. Well, if that's our buggy and we're there, then they've got to make that transfer from the emergency basis. Okay? But you got the triage stuff. In other words, if you're in the emergency room doing fine, it's just a matter of what's on the bed in Jonesboro, and I got a car wreck, I'm gonna do you in the emergency room, you know, till the time, don't make sure we can transfer an hour, 8 hours. And that's a decision that somebody on the spot's got to make. And I just am okay, bad attitude. Money driven. That's, to a point, that's correct. All of us are money driven. But after a point, what happens to the compassion? You know?
Alright,
But like I said, and I apologize for not being here Tuesday night, when you had aired some of your frustrations. Does that answer some of your questions on why that we haven't already purchased the ambulance?
Yeah, and let me say this, I brought up 2 things at the meeting that turned out had been done, and my people didn't come to me. You fixed the road in Burdette, and you widened the road into Bassett to took care of that, even though we were so doing it, that's been accomplished.
Yeah.
And I brought that up, but ambulance situation, we've had an empty building in Wilson, Arkansas almost 90 days.
How do you suggest we move forward?
I personally, ethically speaking, do we owe it to Pafford to meet with them again, or, and buy 2 ambulances, like Molly said, or you said, or do we say, hey, come to the table, and here is what we've got, and here's what we're gonna do, can you comply with what we want? And what situation we in legally to renegotiate the contract? Now, state tells me, State Attorney General's office says that the contract that we write for the entire county is not binding to the local communities if they do something else. And I can assure you, Wilson, Arkansas will do something else. Bassett will do something else. Adjourn will do something else. Birdsong, Denwood will do something else. Dice will do something else over the other one. I can assure you, there's people in Pafford don't know what to do those places. I have a special interest, folks. I was hatched in South Mississippi.
I worked down there with you, Doc, I know where some of the places you're talking about, and I still have trouble finding them.
Well, my suggestion to answer your question is, if you feel like ethically, we need to give Pafford a chance, then meet with them. But keep in mind, we should have other options that save the county some money. But whatever's best for the county is what I want to do. I don't mind the $200,000 in ambulance if that's what's best for the people in this county. I don't mind that. But if we don't have to spend it, we still do the service we want, then we probably should spend it. But I don't like to be threatened with litigation, because they threatened you that day with litigation. And you said, good with and I was proud of it.
Sounds like they would've been very, sounds like they would've been sorry if they, you know, if they did.
Here's what I'd like to recommend, and this will take a motion from the committee. I would like to recommend that we authorize the judge to go ahead and get our attorney with you and renegotiate this emergency clause. We can't give them exclusivity on transfers. I'd like to see us renegotiate that contract for emergency services. If that includes bringing a different ambulance service into Wilson to provide for the south end of the county, do so. If y'all decide that another ambulance, we need to buy an ambulance, that's one thing, but I'm gonna be truthful, I don't see 2. I've seen as high as 5 of them parked down their base. And I'm still, they're a for-profit business.
Oh, I understand.
And my thing is, if they're a for-profit business, why are we buying an ambulance to make a profit?
Well, and their personnel, everybody that you and I know that work for that ambulance service has gone someplace else because they don't pay them. So we're looking at people that are farmers.
But if you've got three, if you've got a different service that will bring three to the south end, why buy any?
Well, again, I think we go back to legality of what we're stuck with. But because this,
I don't
this
think
kind
Right now, we're not
of.
stuck with anything, that's what he's
We're
saying.
not stuck.
Well,
I think
from
this
what I told
contract
the
is
state
simple.
attorney general's office, that's what he told me, but I'm not smart enough to know in technicality in law.
Authorize
That's what Jake's saying, is
In the
that our
documents
contract's
we
will.
have, it was just
That's
like
gonna come to this committee.
But I don't know.
I'd like them to come to your committee.
Well,
Once they
Chris
read
Brown told me he didn't have one, wobble, so.
I didn't know, and the only reason I called is I had a friend in Texas that used to be here, and they'd just been through a county versus city problem with ambulance service. They've been through this. And that was his answer, but he lives in Texas. He said, don't get service. I don't know. But, and don't let me stick my neck out, when I talk to this fellow again, I won't bring the 3 ambulances. I hadn't talked to him in a while. But I'll talk to him before midnight tonight.
Well, all right, I'll make a motion that we, that the judge and Jake, start the process of renegotiating with Pafford and looking at the contract and see what we can do.
But I'd like Patrick to come speak to the committee.
That'd be this committee.
Yeah, fireplace and such.
See what they do for us.
Now, if we have to buy ambulances out of CARES, then the new committee
Just say
would
about
kick
that.
in, but I think we ought to be
And I,
able to do
and,
it
you know,
without buying.
and I agree with Dr. Cullum. I mean, we have been months on this and we have not done it.
Well, and I think we've got to get this, I think this contract needs to be renegotiated immediately. Because I think we were in violation when we created it, basically. And by renegotiating it, now is the time to put it forward. Either put an ambulance in Wilson, or we'll bring it up, we look at bringing in different services.
And I tend to agree with you. I don't really know just a whole lot about it, but I can understand the Wilson ambulance, but I really can't understand the Bible ambulance at all.
Well, the revenue for a multi-million-dollar corporation, and I don't mind anybody making money, but come back to me, underserved needs, and dollar value is really easy. And that's what we got.
But I have agreement on that. I mean, either, yeah. I agree. Right.
We have a motion.
I'll second that.
Well, I have a comment before the second.
Before
the second.
Well, after the second, you'll have
Second,
a discussion.
now we're gonna ask for
Okay, let's make a
discussion.
comment.
Go ahead. What you got?
Well, the situation, Blyville and OCO, it should not be, we should have the same service for the whole entire county.
Absolutely, I agree.
And if, I would not like this limited to one particular ambulance service to come and serve people in the county. It doesn't make a difference which in the county, we should have the same services for everybody available. And not based upon emergency happens, they happen everywhere. It just tied just to one company. Whatever these Pafford and other ambulance, they have to work it out. But as far as Mississippi County, should be open, whoever wants to come in and do business.
Well, and I agree with you on all transfers.
Right.
On emergency, all we do with this is we designate who will be our emergency response. In this case, we've already got Pafford for Blyville and Osceola. Manila and Leachville have Anderson. Now, the Osceola is supposed to take care of South Mississippi County. We feel like they can have an ambulance. If they don't want to, then maybe we look at finding it to another.
Let's find somebody.
And there's, that's a lot of square miles down there. I mean,
I didn't mean to go geographic line.
No,
I
it's
just-
not, no.
JP district.
They're not
contact,
competing.
that's a, yeah, contact agreement.
He probably has 475 miles and 975
Oh,
miles.
wow.
Okay,
Okay. I've
we have a
mentioned-
motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Judge, you want to contact Pafford? I think you should bring Jake to you because we need him to look at the contract. But I tend to agree with the Pafford and talk to us too. But I think we're gonna have to negotiate a contract that is acceptable and get some ambulance down
Well,
south.
all right, let's not get the cart full of horses. That's what we'll do, then we'll ask Pafford to come and talk to this committee first.
Okay. If y'all get a date and a time, we'll just call a meeting. Just like that.
Mr. Henry, would you make a note there that we'll call Pafford and ask them to meet with, this committee that's, acceptable to both groups?
Hey, I noticed my name's on that new committee, y'all put the logo on it every time I talk about it, put it in the new committee. I got
Well, you were put on there mainly because you're a physician, so you understand that part of the industry. But the other part is you had some concerns over the speed we were moving, and I think that, I think you should certainly have a voice.
that I eat in the bed, because what the general public looks at us for. They listen to whatever's in the newspaper, whatever goes on, and then they'll come up to me at the Wilson Cafe and say, when's our ambulance coming? Go up there and eat with me, Friday night. And I guarantee you 2 people will come by and say, when's the ambulance coming? And I don't have an answer.
Well, I guess the simplest answer is when federal government quits amending the rules right here, and we know how to spend the money. That's the big part.
That is a good answer. That's a good answer. We'll turn it over to the federal government, which is bad.
Mr. Henry.
I would like to, something was said earlier about, something was said earlier
about the lifestyle.
whether we can lease or whether we have to give, or, you know, if we was to buy the ambulance and stuff through the ARP. So that was on that conference call also. And she said that it was best if we was to maintain ownership, not do a lease, but have a memorandum of agreement that they would do certain things like the upkeep and the staffing and all that. But that if state law required a lease, then we could do it that way either way. It's recommended not. If you guys decided to buy them through ARP and all that.
And I get that. My concern with all of that is, I do not want it to appear that we are giving Pafford a piece of equipment that Emerson would come in later and say, hey, we need that piece of equipment. Or if we allow Riverside to come in down in the south end, Riverside would come in and say, hey, we need that piece of equipment.
I fully
Because
understand.
we are putting ourselves in business with them.
I was just wanting to make sure we gave you the info. Was there anything else to say?
I get it. Okay. I think we've got an agenda for handling that, and hopefully we can move forward quickly with it and get some decisions made. Under old business, I'm gonna bring something up. There. We bought a vehicle for juvenile last year. Now, I'm gonna request something of you I've asked for before. Can you get me a copy of the law that says the arresting agency is responsible for initial transport of juveniles?
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, I'll put the last time, Chip Wood, working with the judge, and they get it filed out, and they get it out to them. I seen him yesterday. He said-
I'm getting tired of hearing from certain police agencies that they're having to transport to other places. And that's their problem, and I realize that, that's not y'all job. Because y'all have to transport them after they're arrested, bring them back to juvenile.
Yes, the vehicle we bought last year was like juvenile fund, and it was set up for programming, for, taking kids to the service, for the, finding jobs for them, and the at-risk programs that we did, that was paying out juvenile service fund. The one that the county general law, that was banned back in 2008, now was set for transport. I don't understand how the arresting agency feels that the juvenile officer transport because of liability reasons.
I don't mean
The
the
arresting agency should take them to detention because what they do is what's swapping liability off from a city municipality, until the attorney will agree, over to a county liability that's not a certified law enforcement to take them to a secure facility. And you work in police department, you know, a lot of times I worked at Christian County, the detention center.
But I've got to have it in writing,
injuries.
and I can have it in writing to show that certain person, because they don't understand anything except black and white.
So, but so juvenile does, you do though have a vehicle that you can transport people in, is that correct?
Yes, we got, like over 100,000 miles on.
Well, no, it could. Okay, alright, so the answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah. But the thing of it is, originally, when you arrest them, it is the arresting agency's responsibility to transport them wherever the juvenile officer tells them.
Okay, so I've got
Because
a
even if
question.
we had a juvenile detention facility, and he wanted to send them to Little Rock,
He could.
he could.
Okay, so I've got a scenario here. Let's say something, let's just say something terrible like what happened at the school happened here in Blyville, okay? So you've arrested this and you're looking where we're gonna transport them, okay? What do we do with that kid what do we do with that juvenile in the meantime?
The rest of the agency has.
So what do they do? They put them in?
They put them in a holding cell until they get their arrangements made. They can hold them up to 6 hours.
Well, so where are holding cells?
Yeah, every agency has a holding cell.
Bibles tell me that when they read it, now you gotta remember what instance we're talking about. There's several instances since the sole closure of the jail.
Okay.
Okay, so,
this is just a made up scenario in my mind. Where are they?
As the latest incident, they called, we said it was gotta be a pretty thing, it's gonna be pretty out. Of course, gotta be told, take them there before we get them for detention. Okay, for detention. Now, once the original agency takes them to where they need to go, or if original agency picks them up, when they call the up probation and say, hey, you come pick this kid up, this man up, take him to jail, all right? They arrest somebody. Why would you shift custody over and liability over to somebody else to get them? Because now that's over liability to different places, two different entities. But they arrest agencies should take them to a secure facility, any of these agencies, with the exception of, Bible said they don't. They have a place to hold them until they can get them.
So Blyville doesn't have a holding
They
cell?
said when they redressed the armory up to the PD, they did not design it to have a holding facility. Go right into the Sally Port, take them in, book them out, and let them bond out, release them, or you take them to detention. And if it's a male, this is what we try to ask agency. If you arrest a male, adult male, or female, what do y'all do with them? We do Bible arrest. What are they gonna do with them? They're gonna take them to the jail. So it's the same thing. If they arrest a juvenile, they take them to whatever facility we can find. Now, right now, some of the agencies are saying, well, we don't have that person set aside to take them to Cricket or Cricket County.
Wait, I'm confused.
They have more staff than juvenile.
Now, I will say, I was under the impression, when we closed the jail, that we were giving the transport money to the juvenile department.
Me too.
For them to, I will say that. Now, I'm not saying that I think it's your responsibility, but that was the way I understood that it was going to happen.
Housing, not transport, housing. Now, if you go to DYS, that's after commitment. Okay? And they go to the Division of Youth Services, then we will take them to the Division of Youth Services after they go to the jail. Because it may take a day or two to figure the process. I got to try to figure out where they're going to go from there to the Division of Youth Services. It may be, I've took them all over to Yale County, and you shoot up the face of drop them off.
So we did transfer some expenses back to the cities then, in essence, closing the jail, because instead of having to drive them to Luxora, they're having to drive them to Jonesboro or West Memphis.
Yes.
Okay.
But here's the thing, they never had the ability to hold a juvenile. They could put them in a holding facility because 90% of the time with a juvenile, we'll use a runaway. Somebody gets arrested as a runaway. You're not gonna take them to a holding, you're not gonna take them to a detention facility. You take them to the station, you call the parent comes, signs a bail bond, and takes them home. You've got to have a holding facility to hold them until the parent can get there.
So does the jail have a holding facility?
Our
I
jail
don't-
would, it'd be a whole room.
Well, a room, so do they have a room?
No, my,
Our juvenile jail has absolutely nothing right now. If it's a runaway, okay, if it's runaway, they can hold them up to 6 hours, and they can hold them in the kitchen up to 6 hours for the parent to get.
But, so I guess I'm confused, where are they gonna hold them for 6 hours?
They'll have to come back to PD or at the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office has to find a room to hold them. Because with all the funding cut, we used to have a COS, we used to come pick them up and take them to COS and hold them for a little bit.
Consolidated youth
Consolidated
services.
service.
Okay.
They cut funding there, they still have a shelter. If they don't hold them at the PD, they will still have to take them to COS. They still have a runaway shelter. They just cut funding for transport, for COS, transport officers to pick them up and bring them back. See what I'm saying?
Well,
Molly, I
think-
can answer your question, because the chief of police is the one who gave me the tour of the Justice Complex here in Blytheville. And they were originally going to have a room that was going to be a holding area, but they found out they were gonna have to put in a sprinkler system, and they were gonna have to put a whole bunch of stuff in that room to turn it into a holding cell, so they chose not to expend those funds and to use that room as something else. And why?
That's on them.
That's on them.
Right.
So, okay, again, so, back to my scenario, okay, just help me understand and let's just bang it out here. So, if we had an active youth shooter and we arrested him and you're trying to find a spot for him, and it's in Blytheville, what do we do with that kid until we find a spot?
The PD would have to hold them.
Like in the back of the car?
Find a place to hold them.
There's
We're
no-
not holding them up here.
Okay.
We're not taking them up here. They would have to find an active shooter.
You're-
An active shooter, you're gonna get a harsh appearance, the prosecutor's gonna let you file against the adult.
Well, what if it happens what if it
Okay,
happens that they're all from home? I mean, where are you putting them?
No, let me give you this example. You arrest somebody for DWI, you have to take them to the station, you have to give them a test. You have to write all their paperwork before you can take them to the county jail.
So where do they sit?
So, that's Blythe's problem, that's not ours.
Here's like, even if it's active shooter at school, they won't be arraigned right then. They'll still have to go to juvenile detention, where they get before a judge, just like we had one arraigned this morning. Sheriff's office has to go to Jonesboro, pick them up, okay, and bring them back to them arraigned. Alright, then they'll go back to the juvenile detention, in the area that only holds juvenile charges and adults. But yeah, they'll have to be, when they get picked up, and they're charged until they're arraigned. And actually, legally, it's after they get papers filed on it. But we say charged. Once they be arraigned, then they go back to a designated facility on the juvenile side of the jail that holds the
Okay.
adults.
Okay.
And the charges.
So is there an issue with where they're at? I mean, is there not?
They call us, I get you a bed in Crittenden County, you shoot them down in Crittenden County, they stay there.
Okay,
But
so,
in the meantime, while the PD is, that's the thing, they'll call me, who's gonna transport, the rest of the agency transport. I mean, it's just really.
We've got to get it
real
right
simple.
in the hand,
Yeah,
and say,
Right.
this is what the law says. You arrest them, you transport.
okay, so they're just, I
Agreed.
wanna make sure we're all clear, so.
And, yeah, I mean, right, and here lately, it's been working out
We've
great.
been doing it for 35, we've been doing it for over 35 years. I was
we
in
had-
law
we
enforcement
had-
that long ago.
We had them, we had one in Crittenden County, and sent them down there. I went down there yesterday, did detention here, okay, we right back to Crittenden County. Now, then on my way home, or way back to the office, I get a call and had a kid pick up at school. So, how things transpire, I had to put in Crittenden County, because Crittenden County has Zoom capabilities, okay?
Okay.
So, I was under the assumption that the district courts have Zoom capabilities, they have satellite.
Right.
It's different. So I thought, hey, this would be easy. I sent them to Crittenden County, they got it worked out through our county. They said from Zoom, Mississippi County would not have to travel, just make a call. Well, I was wrong. They don't have Zoom capability, so I called, the dispatch, had them go pick them up, bring them to district court for arraignment for adult. Now, obviously, once they're charged as an adult, juvenile officers out of it, we're out of this, our jurisdiction is over. Which brings me to another important question that I was going to, ask my higher up. we have $65,000 for housing for next year, okay?
That's the money.
Okay, there's
That's the money,
okay,
that's for housing.
okay.
If we was gonna look at it, and I figure within about the first quarter of next year, we're probably gonna be through. Once a kid is charged as an adult, we lose jurisdiction until it's transferred. So the money of housing that kid, even though it's on the juvenile side, it's adult jurisdiction, we shouldn't have to pay it. It should shift over to the sheriff's office. Because we no longer have jurisdiction on that until it may get transferred back to us. And it's a highly likely to do. But until then, the bill should be sent to the sheriff's office, not the bill department.
Who takes the cost on the EJJ? Who takes the cost on the
EJJ, they're due ahead. They take care of that. Now, once they have a transfer hearing, they transfer to EJJ. Yeah, if they had to sit in jail that day or two, do we do DUIs? Juvenile gets killed for that. Well, if y'all familiar with EJJ, it's Jimmy Juvenile jurisdiction, it's just west side of Jimmy. A kid can be charged as an adult and he get transferred back to juvenile, extended juvenile jurisdiction. So they go, we still we obtain jurisdiction back, they'll go DUIs, they'll have a adult sanction imposed, like 20 years prison. After they complete DUIs, they'll come back, review to see if they're gonna get out of DUIs. And at that point, they'll say, all right, they're gonna get that 20 years prison time, or say, hey, he did good in DUIs, he's rehabilitated, let's make it 20 years probation or 10 years probation to this SIS. And we done that one. But in the meantime, once we get it back and send it to juvenile jurisdiction, it may be, if he's in jail, staying on bond, and bonded out yet, it may be that a week or two, it's transferred back. Once it gets filed, not the judge says transfer, once it gets file marked, then we'll pick up the tab from that file mark date to the date that he released
You, after the fact, you mentioned something about like a reimbursement program for transporting.
Yes, and that is, there's a couple, counties that does it, work on that. That is, it's usually from, jail to, court.
The jail to the court, okay, gotcha, not from the arrest to the,
I wish it was, that'd be great.
So, yeah, so pretty standard though, you're saying the arresting entity transports to.
I mean, really, the county liability of violence, say, this is just hypothetical. Say,
We have never done that.
I'm just trying to get an understanding.
It's always been the arresting agency's responsibility. If it's an adult, it's the arresting agency's responsibility to transport them to wherever. It was just like when the state police would arrest somebody in the county, we would give tests, they look and say, we all take them to county. Most of the time we'd say, yeah, we do it anyway. But technically, it was the state police's responsibility to transport them out to the county.
Okay. So if the state policeman picked up a juvenile, it would be the state police's department?
Yes.
Okay. Well, and it would not have changed my vote either way about closing the jail, but I didn't fully understand that, I guess, back at the.
As soon as you can get that from them in writing, I know it's in writing somewhere, I've seen it at one point.
they get a whole
But I don't have access to all the books I used to. Print me off a copy and send it to me, and I'll send it to somebody.
I talked to him yesterday, he supposed to get a whole protocol and all that together with the codes and all, supposed to be sent it out to everybody. I'm not sure when that.
Well, it does make sense, if Osceola arrested a juvenile, they wouldn't take him to the sheriff's department to transport him to.
No.
I mean.
They don't have to, they have holding cells, but they could take it to the
They're
county.
holding cells.
Osceola has their own,
Yeah, you got your own,
On
okay.
jail and municipal.
All right.
But we can control a certain portion of that, because the sheriff's department's answerable to us. We can get some help to control ourselves by the police. Now, your municipalities, people that live there got to help us with that.
Right. Okay, does anyone else have anything else we brought before the committee? We are going to stand adjourned.
What time's our meetings tomorrow?
31 tomorrow.